The joke wasn't the punchline was the warning. When late-night comedy whispered about photos no one's supposed to see, the room went silent because everyone understood exactly what was being threatened. They laughed, the audience clapped, the cameras cut away. But behind the scenes, panic detonated like a glass dropped on marble. Because when Saturday Night Live lets something slip, it's never accidental. It's a flare shot into the sky, and this one burned bright, hinting at images, real ones, quietly circulating, allegedly tying Meghan Markle to a world she has spent years trying to outrun. Yachts, billionaires, and one name so toxic it scorches everything it touches: Andrew. This wasn't rumor recycling. This wasn't internet sludge. This was a cultural institution nudging the door open just enough to say, we know something you don't yet. And once that happens, the clock starts ticking. Inside the gates of Montecito, the story goes, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. Phones flying, voices raised, a scramble so frantic it felt less like damage control and more like triage. Lawyers dialing, PR rewriting, the kind of meltdown that only happens when the threat is real, not hypothetical, not online chatter, but imminent. Because jokes about unseen photos aren't jokes at all. They're countdowns. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Meghan Markle did not appear out of thin air. Before the palace, before the titles, before the carefully curated tears and docuseries confessions, she was a working actress navigating elite spaces most people never even glimpse. And that alone raises questions, not insults. Questions, because access like that doesn't happen by accident. Struggling cable TV actresses don't typically vacation in billionaire playgrounds. They don't drift through invitation-only yacht environments or glide into private members' clubs where global power brokers unwind away from cameras. Those doors don't open randomly. They open because someone powerful turns the key. This is where the whispers begin. Not name-calling, not slander. Industry shorthand. The unspoken understanding of how certain women are placed into elite leisure ecosystems where proximity is currency and access is the transaction. Nobody's saying every yacht is a crime scene, but pretending they're floating brunch spots for innocent networking? Please. Everyone in that world knows the rules, even when no one says them aloud. So when Meghan's name keeps circling that universe again and again, people stop asking if she was there. They start asking how early she got there. And this story would still be cocktail gossip if it ended with yachts. But it doesn't, because the moment Andrew enters the frame, everything changes. Andrew isn't controversial, he's radioactive. Entire institutions have bent themselves into knots trying to keep his name from contaminating others. And yet, here it is, surfacing again, tied to a timeline that predates Harry, predates the fairy tale, predates the narrative we were sold. Multiple longtime royal watchers and researchers have alleged that Meghan knew Andrew long before she ever met Harry. Not after marriage, not through royal duty, before, through overlapping elite circles, through private environments, through the same closed-door world Andrew has spent decades trying to escape. Why does that matter? Because if that's even remotely true, the entire origin story collapses. The outsider narrative disintegrates. The chance meeting becomes choreography. Destiny starts looking an awful lot like positioning. And that is exactly why this topic stayed buried for so long. Because once Andrew's name touches your backstory, everything gets re-examined. Every introduction, every invitation, every sudden leap up the social ladder. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. Let's kill the fairy tale right now. These weren't cute boat trips. These weren't influencer sunsets or carefree girls' getaways. Elite yacht culture is a sealed ecosystem. Guest lists are curated with surgical precision. Men with money show up knowing exactly why they're there. Women arrive understanding what's expected, even if it's never spoken aloud. Silence is part of the contract. This is why events like these aren't advertised, they're whispered, passed quietly, designed so nothing follows you back to shore. No cameras, no receipts, no accountability. So when Meghan Markle's name keeps surfacing in that context, asking questions isn't cruel, it's logical. You don't just wander into that world. You're invited, you're vouched for, someone signs off on you. And then there's the place where all of these worlds overlap without fingerprints. Soho House, not a hotel, not a restaurant, a gatekeeping machine, no cameras, no press, no records, a private ecosystem built to connect ambition with power behind closed doors. At the center of Meghan's early orbit there sat one man who held the keys. Not a casual friend, not a plus one. The global membership director, the human firewall between who gets access and who doesn't. The same man who later introduced her to Harry. The same man front and center at her wedding. The same man who then vanished from public view. People don't disappear when everything is clean. They disappear when attention becomes dangerous, when questions start forming, when timelines stop stop lining up, because once people start asking how introductions happened, the illusion cracks. Now comes the part everyone tiptoes around. For years, author and researcher Kirby Summers has alleged that photos exist, not the debunked mislabeled ones floating online, but different images. Images she claims show Meghan on a yacht in Phuket with Andrew in the early 2000s. And here's the chilling detail: she insists mainstream media outlets already have them. Pause. Sit with that. If those photos don't exist, why does everyone behave like they do? Media doesn't sit on nothing. Editors don't bury irrelevance. Legal teams don't hover around fiction. That kind of silence only happens when publishing something would scorch multiple powerful interests at once. That's why this story never dies. It hibernates, waiting for the moment when protecting it becomes less useful than releasing it. And now, comedians are referencing it. Commentators are circling it. Cultural gatekeepers are testing the waters. Because when jokes start naming what the media won't show, the pressure shifts. Here's what makes people uneasy. If this were dead wrong, the response would be simple. Deny it, explain it, shut it down cleanly. Instead, what we got was silence, reshuffling, distance, legal posturing, not clarity, containment, no firm denial of knowing Andrew early, no clear timeline explaining elite access, no explanation for how a mid-level actress moved in spaces reserved for billionaires and royalty, just nothing. And silence is never neutral. Silence is strategy. This story doesn't just threaten one reputation, it quietly humiliates another Harry. Because once the possibility enters the room that Meghan knew Andrew before she ever met Harry, the optics shift permanently. Suddenly, Harry isn't the rescuer prince. He's the last man to realize what room he walked into. That doesn't mean love is fake, but it does mean innocence is gone. And once the public stops seeing a royal marriage as destiny and starts viewing it as strategy, there is no reset button. Why now? Because stories like this don't surface when they're dangerous, they surface when they're useful. The public's appetite has changed. Glossy rebrands aren't working. Victimhood fatigue is real. And comedy has become the last place where truth can slip through without permission. That Snell moment wasn't random. It was a temperature check, and the audience didn't flinch. Reputations don't collapse from one accusation. They collapse when unanswered questions start lining up. A yacht here, a club there, the same names, the same silence. This wasn't exposure. It was the curtain lifting just enough for people to realize the stage was never empty. And curiosity, once ignited, doesn't need permission. What happens after curiosity wakes up is never gentle. It doesn't knock. It doesn't ask permission. It barges in, drags old timelines into the light, and starts rearranging memories people thought were safely locked away. And once that process starts, no amount of PR polish can put things back the way they were. Because now, the questions aren't whispered in corners anymore. They're forming out loud, slowly, methodically, like dominoes lining themselves up. The biggest mistake people make is thinking this story hinges on a single photograph. It doesn't. Photos are just symbols. Proof is never one image, it's behavior, patterns, reactions, who panics and who stays calm, who over-explains and who goes silent, who lawyers up before anyone even makes an accusation. Then there's the timing. Always the timing. Meghan's relationship with Harry didn't begin in a vacuum. It began after years of elite social circulation, after familiarity with private members' culture, after understanding how influence flows quietly rather than publicly. She didn't stumble into royalty, she navigated toward it with precision that now feels less romantic and more surgical. That realization is what unsettles people the most, not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it reframes the entire love story. Fairy tales collapse not when villains appear, but when protagonists turn out to be strategists. And let's talk about the aftermath, the distancing. The burn the bridges energy. The scorched earth exits framed as victimhood. The way Meghan didn't just leave royal life, she detonated it, as if staying connected risked exposure rather than comfort. People are starting to wonder if the rage wasn't about mistreatment alone, but about control, about narrative ownership, about making sure her version was the only one that survived long enough to become truth. Because when you've worked your way through closed systems, you understand one thing deeply. Stories are currency. Whoever controls them controls the outcome. That's why every public appearance now feels defensive. Every carefully worded interview feels like it's talking around something instead of about something. The intensity, the insistence, the need to constantly remind the world who she is and who she definitely isn't. The louder the denial energy, the more people lean in. And the cruel irony, none of this would have exploded if silence hadn't lasted so long, if explanations had come early, if timelines had been clarified before speculation filled the gaps. But silence creates space, and space invites imagination. Now imagine being Harry in all of this, watching the public quietly reframe your love story without you ever being able to fully intervene, watching jokes land that make audiences laugh and then pause, watching your wife's past become the subject of curiosity you can't shut down. Because the most devastating part isn't scandal. It's the possibility that you weren't the beginning of the story, just the ending. That realization lingers. It changes posture. It changes energy. It explains a lot about the bitterness, the defensiveness, the perpetual war with perception. Because if your relationship began at the end of a long climb rather than the start of one, innocence was never part of the deal. And here's the final twist nobody talks about enough. This story isn't resurfacing because Meghan is irrelevant. It's resurfacing because she isn't. You don't dig this hard into someone who doesn't matter. You don't risk institutional discomfort for a nobody. Power attracts scrutiny the same way light attracts moths. The difference now is that the public doesn't need confirmation anymore. They don't need photos released. They don't need official statements. They've seen enough reactions to draw their own conclusions. And conclusions formed independently are impossible to undo. That's the real exposure. Not a picture. Not a joke. Not a picture. Not a joke. Not a picture. Not a joke. Not a